Hi, in this video I'll be showing what the difference is between PictureMe Pro and the PictureMe without the Pro. In most cases they are fairly similar, but the Pro version allows you to do some things more, and those are building up. So we're adding more features to the Pro version that we're not adding to the Lite version, simply because they're features that would be not worth it to put in a Lite version. So first of all, the difference between the Lite and the Pro version is that the Pro version is capable of producing output that is using backdrops and images that are larger than 1000 pixels. So the Lite version is always limited to 1000 pixels, and you can't go above that, so the resolution of your output is always fairly low. It'll be fine for emails, it'll be fine for a small print, but if you want maximum quality, then you need to have the Pro version. That's the main difference between the two. Now there are some other differences, like in the, let me show you the interface. So this is PictureMe Pro, and in settings we have a monitor window. So if I click on that, we get a monitor window of the latest result that we created. So if I do a new one and say OK here, then this screen always reflects what I've done last in my scene. So you can make this full screen, this window, and hook it up to or drag it to a second monitor and turn that monitor towards the green screen, so the people in front of the green screen can see what you're doing without being looking over your shoulder. So that's a nice feature to have. And the other features that are only available in the Pro version are the email and print functions. So you can directly email or print from the Pro version. That used to be the only difference, but we've added something new to the Pro version, which is not available in the Lite version, which is not really chroma keying, but you could say lack of chroma keying. So we've added a new algorithm that allows you to do the same that we do with green or blue backdrops with gray neutral backdrops. So let me show you that. Let me first make the screen a little bit bigger, and just load a picture that has a light backdrop. So this one has white. In the previous versions of PictureMe Pro and in PictureMe Lite, this does not work. So if I drag the strength slider down to the right point, then like here, and then use the hue tolerance to get some of the details back, then the only thing I have to correct here are the highlights, because it cannot do the highlights. And just to make things a little bit easier, you can see this backdrop is black. I can make that any color by clicking on it and then selecting a different color. So if I want to make this light cyan, it's light cyan. It was great using as a dark gray because I could see the holes in the hair much better. So to plug in those holes, that's the only thing you need to do manual, is use a brush and you just go over the parts where you need to. It's not hard to brush that, and it makes the image work even though it was a white backdrop. Now those jagged edges here is because this is a fairly a low resolution file, and the higher the resolution file is that you take, the easier it is to make a nice smooth edge. So let me just find a different one that is slightly larger. This one, it does the same thing that we saw with the other one. It takes out the gray. The only parts that are missing are her eyes, because we didn't have preserve eyes on. So if we switch those on, her eyes are back, and we brush in that and the highlights in her hand, and when we OK that, now we can see that's quite nice because this is a higher resolution file. So the file that you use as an input will determine the quality of your Chroma-Keyed result. Saying something about quality of input, the amount of pixels that are imported is determined by this capture setting. Even if you load a file, so you don't actually capture but just load it in manually, it will restrict the file size to whatever you enter here. Why do we do that? Because if you don't, it makes the app less responsive. Because if you have to do 16 megapixels instead of 3, it's over 5 times slower. It takes 5 times longer to process those pixels. So you don't use more megapixels than you need to. And how do you know how many megapixels to use? Well, it depends on when your output is. If your output is going to be a phone or a normal computer display, you don't need 12 megapixels because that display is not 12 megapixels either. So if you're then fine using something like a 3000 by 2000 pixel backdrop, because that's another thing to explain. The backdrop determines the resolution of the result. So if I look at my backdrop folder and clean those up a bit, if I just take one of the standard ones that are in there, like the band one, and I do an information on them, you can see that there are 1000 pixels. So the output size will be limited in this case to 1000 pixels. Even if I put in a 60 megapixel picture and key that, the result will still be 1000 pixels. So how do we get to a higher result pixels? Well, we select a scene or a backdrop that has more pixels. So in this case, in my backdrop, the one that I've added here is called Sala, and if I look at the information for that one, that is 4256 by 2800, so that's 12 megapixels. So for this 12 megapixels, using something like a 6 megapixels would be the absolute maximum I would use for this one. For all the other ones, I would stick to 3 megapixels, because 3 times 2000, 3000 times 2000 is 6 megapixels. This one is 12 megapixels, but you're going to be making the picture you place on there smaller than the actual backdrop, so you don't need the entire 12 megapixels. Hope that makes sense. So I'll show this in practice when we go through some of the demo images. So in Picture, this works, and I've drawn that, so I can OK that, and then she is shown here, and as you can see, her eyes are preserved, her forehead is fine, and if I save that result then and look at the last one, which is I have some more. This is this one. If I double click it, it opens it in preview, and if you go to the maximum size, you can see that this is a much larger file than my display is. So this is much larger than 1000 pixels. So that's how you determine the output quality. It's a combination of your backdrop resolution and your capture. And keep your capture as low as possible. If you don't see fringes in your result, jagged edges in diagonal lines, then you're still okay. If you start seeing jagged edges, you might need to increase the megapixels slightly. But don't do it if you don't have to, because it will just make everything slower. Okay, that's it. Let's look at some other things with some other pictures. So I'll load up a picture, and let me show you something that won't work. So this one, if I open this picture, it opens fine, but there's a problem getting rid of this shadow here, because the girl is way too close to the backdrop. If you do want to key out people, they should not be right in front of the backdrop. Always leave a gap there, preferably 3 feet or more, but don't put them right up to it, and she's right up to that wall, which makes it impossible to key out the colors, because if I want to key out those colors of the backdrop, I can, but before I have all of those colors away, half a girl is gone. So if I choose this right, see, I can't get it better than this, so I end up with a lot of gaps in the girl because I have to make a strong mask before I get rid of the dark shadows. So let's show one that doesn't have that problem. This is far from even lit gray on the backdrop, but it still works. So let me first switch to a different color backdrop. So I'll switch to something like green because there's no green in this image. And as you can see, it's not perfect yet. So what I always do is I switch my hue tolerance to 0 and put my mask strength at 0 and then increase my mask strength until I see the backdrop disappear. And I continue until I have everything I want to be gone in the backdrop gone. Now it's okay, but it's not perfect because you can see gaps. You can see green gaps in her boots and in her hair. So to get rid of those, you can use the hue tolerance. You increase that, and as you increase that, those colors will at one point be restored. There we are. And now if we OK, then she looks pretty good on there. Something else that's new in the Pro version that's not available in the Lite version is quick positioning of the file using the arrow keys and plus and minus key. So if we want to scale up this girl, we can use the plus to make her small steps larger, minus to make her small steps smaller, or shift minus 5 times faster, or shift plus. So it's easier to scale your subject. It's also easier to move your subject because we can use the arrow keys to do that. So we can use the arrow key left, right, up, and down. And again, if we don't use shift, there are more smaller steps, and with shift they become faster. So it's just easier to position your images over the backdrop. Okay, let's look at one that may not be so obvious because we can, let's see, this one maybe. This one is fairly easy to do, and it just happened that the previous setting I used works pretty well with this. The only thing I'd need to correct here is her earrings are slightly white and her ring is white, so we can brush those in. Don't have to be exact about it, we just brush them in. And in her necklace there's light colors as well, and on her ring. And then we can say OK, and that makes a pretty good result. It's not perfect, but it's not easy getting hairs and outlines perfect when there's both blonde and dark-haired people on the subject. So it makes it more difficult to key it out, but it is capable of doing it. And there aren't many apps out there that I know that can do keying of white. You can also do other things as a little side thing. If you don't want a backdrop, but you want these pictures to be all having the exact same backdrop, you can do that by taking your contrast, oops, not that contrast, sorry. First switching to backdrop, and then putting your contrast to 0. That makes the image gray. This is 50% gray. You can use a lighter color if you want. And if you save it like that, you will simply get a picture with a gray backdrop, which is a faster way of doing it than doing it in Photoshop. And if you don't have Photoshop, it's the only way you can do that. So that's a gray. You can go to black, but then you see the white outlines a little bit better. There's a new feature, or actually an improved feature, that might solve that a little bit, which is smooth. If I use smooth and then OK it, then you see that most of the white lines are not as clearly there anymore. The thing that did happen is that the white disappeared again, so I'd have to brush that in again. But the outline of the mask is not as critical, doesn't have the white halo around it that it earlier did have. Not as visible anyway. So what it does basically, when you here select smooth, it takes the mask and shrinks it by 1 pixel and then blurs the edge to gray. So you don't get a hard line from this is a mask, this is not a mask, but you get a more subtle mask, 50% mask, no mask. So it increases quality somewhat. Okay, let's take another one that we cannot do manually. This girl has a top on, or part of her dress on, that is basically the same shades as the backdrop. They're mostly lighter, but they're still gray. So you can't do this automatically. What I can do is increase strength just a little bit more. No, I don't need to increase it more. So about here. I would say it'd be optimum. I'm looking at this area. Then to get the rest of the shirt back, I need to brush it in. In this case, her highlights in her face are similar to that color as well. So what I need to do is I need to decrease the size of my brush and brush in her face, and then carefully here brush in her one shoulder, other shoulder, and then I can use a slightly larger brush to quickly brush in the other parts. Now this also applies for a picture where somebody's wearing green and you have to have their green top shown on the picture. So let's look at how this looks in the end result. Well, this is on the black, that looks fine. Or we can take the brightness up and take it to white, still looks fine. So it shows that the keying works pretty well, and we can restore the contrast to see that it also works great in color. And this is a fairly large file, so we can zoom in quite a bit and the image still looks fine. That's the big advantage of using a higher capture. If you have a higher quality capture, then you will get better results. If you have a crappy beginning crappy shot to begin with, then the end result will never be great either. Okay, let's look at another one. Maybe less obvious, you can also do other backdrops. So these ladies are not in front of a green screen, but they're aptly dressed for the pool they are standing in front of. So we can key out the pool. So we again take tolerance back to normal, to 0. If it allows us to do that, let's see, there we go. And then we increase the strength to the maximum value. And that takes away almost all the water. And the only part where it's still visible is here. So I'll take an eraser and I'll erase the water from there. The only parts where I have to be careful is where I start to brush. So I position my brush, click and drag, and click and drag, and one more click and drag, and there's a little spot here. And that makes it almost perfect, but she's wearing a cyan bikini and she's wearing a cyan necklace. So they're gone. So if we use a brush, we can brush those back in. So simply start here and follow that bikini. It's a bit more work, but you wouldn't do this for like 100 shots. But if you happen to have one subject that happens to have the same backdrop or same clothing as the backdrop, you could do it like that and brush it back in, and that's it. And the only part where I see a little hole here is I think in your head, so I will add that here as well, just to be sure. And okay that. And that looks okay. So it's not so difficult to get nice results of completely different backdrops than a green screen. It's a bit more work, but it is possible. We can also do this with a picture that has more like a different focus. So this picture is taken, this is our royal family of the Netherlands, and it's taken against the backdrop of some trees, which are predominantly green. So what we can do is we can increase the mask strength to maximum and then increase tolerance until we get most of their features back. It won't be complete, but it'll be pretty close, like here. So now the only parts that we need to brush out are the areas here. So if we do that, we just use the brush. I'll do it roughly now because we don't have to do it that exact. Just brush it out and start here, move it down, move it up, brush it out, like that. Now again, you don't want to do this for every image, but if you want to get creative with images that weren't really intended for green screen photography, you can. And it's always nice that you can be creative. The only problem you might now see is that her shirt here is showing up with a little gap. So I take a brush and I brush that back in. And that's it. And I OK that. And they're suddenly right in the silhouette. So that works pretty well as well. Her hair is not perfect. I realize that. If you zoom in, you can see the gaps there, but you have to choose your backdrops where they work. So because it's green and it's got a lot of details in the backdrops, that works here. So if I save this picture and actually look at it, it looks fine. Okay, what else do we have in pictures? Let's see if we can find one else where it's at, which I can tell you something about. Yeah, let's look at this one. This is a typical one where the backdrop is not evenly lit. So there's a lot of difference between this gray and that gray. And there's even a logo here. I just grabbed this one off the internet somewhere. Sorry if it's your picture, I don't mean to abuse it in any way. I'm just using these examples, just randomly grabbing them from the web. So what I'll do here is I'll take tolerance back and decrease strength again until I see part of the backdrop appear that I don't want. That about here. The top right, you can see this appear. So when I've selected it like this, it becomes very easy to brush in the missing parts, because I just take a brush and I just brush in all the parts that are missing. It doesn't take long. It's not a lot of work. And you do get a picture that when you OK it, let me not forget this part, when you OK it, it works pretty well. So that's something you could do with shots that you did not take at all with the intention of using green screen, but now turn them into green screen pictures and put them in front of a completely different backdrop. This could also be done for school photography. If you want to be more creative with what you do in terms of backdrop for a school picture, why not put it against a backdrop that works well for making a cutout and place it against a scene they like. just an example. Let's see if there's anything we did not catch here. I think I've shown most of them. Of course, the ones that are pretty easy are the ones that have a white backdrop already. So this one, for instance, this one's already pretty evenly white. This is overexposed, so it's not difficult to key out. If I don't think I've done this one. So this one is pretty much white, and the only thing I need to do is bring back to the point where I start to see the edges, which is around here, and then use tolerance to get the rest back. Maybe smooth this one because her hair might be better that way, and I'll OK that, and it works fairly well. Works better in light areas because of the slightly white halo. So it's good to choose your backdrop images based on the Chroma-Key backdrop that you use when you take your shot. So if you're using a white or light color, you shouldn't be having very dark colors in your backdrops, because you'll see the fringes, you'll see the halos around the people you take pictures of. But if you choose a backdrop that's light, like we have the light sky here, that works great for this picture. Okay, I think I've said all I wanted to say about this. No, there's one thing I did not mention yet. So the blur background was already in there, but now there is a slider connected. So it has a distance you can set. So if I set it to 5, you can see that this backdrop is now out of focus, and she is still in focus. So you can add a photography effect that can be done with the right lens as well, but you can do it with the green screen setting. So you can decide how much blurring you need, and that depends on the particular backdrop, because if I have a backdrop of only 1000 pixels, like this one, and I move the girl up, if I now do the same blur distance, there's a lot of blur going on. So with this one, because it's only 1000 pixels, I may want to do only like 2 pixels, or maybe 1.5, because it still gives me the focus on the girl in the front. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions on anything I've shown you here, feel free to contact me. If you have any wishes, so if you have any features you'd like to see added to this application, then contact me through the AppForce.One support page. If you like the app, I'd appreciate it if you could give me a positive review in the App Store or Microsoft Store, because that's another thing I did not mention in any earlier videos. PictureMe Pro is now available both on Mac and Windows. So there is a Windows version of PictureMe as well, with the only limitation that it does not have face recognition. That's because Microsoft themselves don't offer that as part of their system, and Apple does. So I could use technology already in the Apple system to use facial recognition, which I could not do in Microsoft's environment. So that's the only difference, basically. All other things are the same, with the only exception of the neutral backdrops, because I still have to update the Windows version to also support neutral gray, white backdrops to be chroma-keyed. So if you run into that now, that will be fixed, but it will take a little time for me to update that version as well and get it through the Microsoft Store. Okay, that's it. I would like to thank you for watching, and have a good day. Bye-bye.